Hello, and welcome to another episode of Twak Analyzes the Witness. And today we are starting off right where we picked up, even though it's been a few weeks or so. It's going to make our way out of the tree houses here and to a place that's very close by. Also, I don't remember if I actually got this. There we go. It's interesting how it is a shadow, but then it ends up kind of lining up with the rock there. I don't know why that's so interesting to me. I just like it. So, before we go into the keep, I also want to look at some of these environmental puzzles. These flower ones are pretty interesting because they rely on lining up these like small objects in the correct position. This one kind of wraps around this rock, and you can see when you step out, it, completely loses any sense of, consistency, cohesiveness. Like, they're separated, they're laid out. It's kind of hard to tell that they were ever in that shape, unless you line it up correctly, where the forced perspective makes it look like a regular puzzle. And then this one over here, whereas the previous one required you to, stand in front of a rock and then it wraps around another one, this one requires you to stand on top of a rock. So they're kind of opposite in the ways they treat the nature. Hold on a moment. So, yeah, I just think these are really cool. It's another example of using the game's rendering to make an environmental puzzle that it realistically would make that shape in real life. It's similar to the tractor or farm equipment back over in the orchard, or in front of the orchard, where that one, the further you go away, the colors start to blend together. Similarly, this one is, if you stand in the right spot, all of the flat objects sort of line up. So, now it's time to go into the keep. The flower field is really nice and, inviting, but the keep is, spooky. Right off the bat, you can see, the shadows of people hanging from there. And then there's the spiky portculli. And then there's those holes in the roof, which, this is an actual, defense mechanism of castles. I mean, the portcullis, obviously, a lot of people know about that. I mean, they're in Lego sets. But the holes, they would, pour vats of tar or acid that are boiling down into the holes of these, battlements, bastilles, sort of. And you can see on the floor there are these dark shaded areas that are the remnants of those. But going up, we reach the actual keep, which is split into two halves. We're going to start with the half that is this way, with the hedge mazes. So, it's pretty fitting that a game where you go and solve mazes on panels would eventually have literal mazes. In this case, you can already see that the wooden, fences look added later. They're not, the same as the hedges. Because if somebody had designed with those dead ends in mind, they would have just had another hedge planted there and cut it accordingly. And so the hedge mazes, it does that to make it obvious that these fences were added in later, which then shows that this is the shape of the hedges without the fences added. And that's just to teach the player that the idea behind these hedge mazes is that the hedges themselves are only part of the puzzle, and you have to take some other information into account. So then you go here and there's no hedges, so you might think, well, what's so special about that? But you'll probably pretty quickly see the overgrown grass, when you go up to here, or if we were to go here, pretty much every turn puts you closer to the overgrown grass. It's pretty visibly noticeable so that you can reach this exit. Then before I go on, I want to turn over here because we have our first audio log of the episode already. Actually, real quick, I just want to look out here. It's another vantage point. It's actually kind of hard to see the mountain from here. That's interesting. This tree blocks your sight directly. Huh. I didn't notice that my first time around, that you can't see the peak of the mountain. That does sort of support a lore theory that isn't super founded, but I won't get to it yet. You can see Treehouse Laser from over there. Okay.
In the traditional view, a person is free. He is autonomous in the sense that his behavior is uncaused. That view, together with its associated practices, must be re-examined when a scientific analysis reveals unexpected controlling relations between behavior and environment. By questioning the control exercised by autonomous man and demonstrating the control exercised by the environment, a science of behavior also seems to question dignity or worth. A person is responsible for his behavior, not only in the sense that he may be justly blamed or punished when he behaves badly, but also in the sense that he is to be given credit and admired for his achievements. A scientific analysis shifts the credit as well as the blame to the environment, and traditional practices can then no longer be justified. These are sweeping changes, and those who are committed to traditional theories and practices naturally resist them. As the emphasis shifts to the environment, the individual seems to be exposed to a new kind of danger. Who is to construct the controlling environment, and to what end? Autonomous man presumably controls himself in accordance with a built-in set of values. He works for what he finds good. But what will the putative controller find good? And will it be good for those he controls? Answers to questions of this sort are said, of course, to call for value judgments. B.F. Skinner, 1971.
Okay, so that is a pretty interesting audio log as far as the witness goes. So Skinner, B.F. Skinner, is a behavioral psychologist who is probably nowadays most well known for the Skinner box, which was an experiment involving, I believe it was rats, where they would press a button and get rewarded with like a food pellet. And then even when the food pellet was removed, they would continue to press the button. Something like that. Don't quote me. But essentially, it's what Skinner's work pretty much developed into is that the behaviors that we think of as just like personal to somebody, like somebody's choices, are pretty heavily influenced by environment, whether it's like where they've grown up and where they've been raised into an adult, what's around them, how they perceive what's around. Like, yeah, environment plays a huge factor into people's decision making and rationale. And this is like, for one thing, it calls into question how we treat punishment and rewards. If somebody's punishment is based off like what they did, like a crime, is that punishing them, or did they commit the crime because like their environment drove them to that? Should we be instead looking at the environment? Likewise, if somebody is rewarded for doing something, how much of that is due to their own merits or their environment? This is a pretty, relevant example today with things like economic status. If somebody does well in school, how much of that is because they had resources available to them versus like impoverished areas that don't have as many resources, that type of thing. So like it's a troubling question, not just because it raises questions about how we as a society do those things, but also because it implies that there is a creator of an environment who then can pass their own judgments over what's deemed good or bad. This is, this has big things to deal with, like urban development and, what name you, every aspect of societal, like engineering related to everyday life. But also, it has a big point to deal with, game design. The witness is supposed to be designed to limit extrinsic rewards. Extrinsic rewards are things that are outside the player's head, I guess. They don't have anything to do with the player directly. This is like the food pellet. And in a lot of video games, you'll see like leveling up, so numbers go up. You'll see lights and flashing, or just like a reward of like a voice clip or art or what have you. Instead, the witness tries to gear itself towards intrinsic rewards. Intrinsic rewards are the things where it's the personal reward you get out of something. It's like the reward you get from how you perceive it. Pretty much like an example is if you want to get good at a video game, then getting better at that game is intrinsically rewarding because you find value in being better at it. If you're playing a fighting game, then getting better at the fighting game can be intrinsically rewarding because you value that skill gain that you've done. And in the witness case, in a lot of puzzle games, the reward for solving a puzzle is having conquered a hard puzzle. Puzzles are their own reward. It's something that the Orchard is sort of controversial for, but its early placement really helps emphasize that not every puzzle has this big golden box at the end of it. I mean, roughly 12 or so do. But yeah, that's a pretty poignant quote. And it makes sense that you can see it from, like, you can either look at a big golden box upon doing so, surrounded by another box, or you can just look out at the rest of the game where you can see all these other lasers. Is that enough of a reward? Do we find that good like the designers did? Also, I just want to note that the keep is the area that is a physical maze. So there's sort of like a lab rat in a maze, despite all my rage, sort of a comparison being drawn. And also, in the hedge mazes themselves, our solutions are given to us by the environment instead of any sort of knowledge of puzzle practices, which are in the back half. So the fact that it's in the front half also relates to that we are directly learning and responding to our environment for these puzzles. Also, creepy dead guy. This is a visual Easter egg a lot of people are familiar with. And also, there's a few others around here. Another notable one is this guy, this individual on the jar vat tub of oil or something. This is, of course, what they use to pour down those holes. I've seen this compared to the person on the cover of Myst, and I can kind of agree. I personally think that it's a reference to Myst as like an Easter egg or something. The fact that these people are either falling, or if you were to turn it right side up, which is hard to do in the game, they're like sinking. So either way, they're falling no matter how you look at it. Or they're falling off a ledge, I guess, if you turn it sideways. Basically, these people are falling. That's not good. You can think about like the tar falling onto people as it's being poured. But just note that like there's a lot of death at these front walls. There is also the lady in the window. It doesn't look like much from here, but if you look down at that rock, you can see the shadow there, like a girl, her hand out in a dress. This is, another visual Easter egg. I want to note, though, that the metal that this is made out of is the same metal that came from the ship. It's the same metal that is over on the lake. I might be able to get a better view. Not really. It's the same metal that's on the ship. Material-wise, like, this rusted metal appears in a few other places. I believe it's the same metal that appears on the beach shoreline. And then it's also over in the quarry area, in, like, the boathouse and logging facility. Just pay attention to, like, where this metal is. I think usually this metal is used to show, like, industry or more modern day concepts, because the rest of the keep in the back half is pretty modern. The ship is modern, and then, like, the industry of the quarry and logging facility and all that is modern. So yeah, just keep note of that. Also, interestingly, it looks like part of it was caught by the tree here, tree branches. And I just want to say, there aren't many visual Easter eggs that directly use shadows like this. I mean, there's a few. There's, like, the juggler, and there's the statue reaching for the grail. But most of the other ones that are not statues don't use shadows. So this is pretty interesting because this is the shadow area, so it is allowed to do that. Okay, back to puzzles. So the first two hedge mazes had very obvious visual indicators of where you can't go, but this one does not. However, if you were to go just straight, you quickly hear that, like, crunching. You might go around and notice that it cuts out. And eventually you might realize that there's very specific places where those two different types of footsteps occur. And I think it's interesting that these first two hedge mazes use visual indicators, because it's sort of a red herring. Not that there's... It shows that there's special indicators that tell you where you're supposed to go. And then it sort of fades away with this one. And then it's even less visible here. Until finally in the last one, it's completely invisible what the secret is. But it's also sort of keeping you on your toes, not letting you get too into, like, a sense of security. But it is also, like, you have to really pay attention to your environment instead of letting it completely go put you on autopilot. It's being aware of your surroundings, even though they are guiding you where you need to go. Okay. So yeah, the final puzzle of hedge mazes. There's nothing weird going on. But one thing I want to note is that this... Well, let's see. So this puzzle over here, if you were to start it from here, I guess you would be able to see the panel, just barely. Though if you move forward, the fence will block your way. Then the next two panels are at a 90-degree angle to the right, so you can't really see them clearly the moment you step in. I guess you'd be able to see it over there, kind of slightly at an angle. Same for this one. But then this one, you can see very clearly when you step in, which I think is to try and make you realize that the panel and the hedge maze are different, because the panel has a line going forward. We cannot go forward. That's pretty much the most obvious example, is that unlike the last two hedge mazes where we started in the corner and went forward, we can't keep going forward. There's a wall in the way, and that wall is not on the panel. So finding out where they overlap is the solution. And now I could go and do the laser now, but there is an entire other half to the keep. You only have to do one half to complete the actual area, which is good for speedrunning. I can tell you that much. But instead, we're just going to go to the back half. I want to start by going up here, because this platform is interesting. I don't believe there's anything, like, special mechanically up here. I don't think there's any puzzles that you can only find or anything. I could be wrong. But you instead get a pretty wide view of the back half. And you can see there's a lot of statues. There is a lot of these glass walkways. From here, you can also barely make out the shipwreck. You can see the drawbridge, which is normally up. That is pretty important. This is like one of the few places in the keep where you can see the drawbridge. And you can see the tree houses as well, which you can't normally do from the keep. You can't directly see the tree houses, I should say. You can see, like, the trees. And this is important because the keep is probably the one that has the most direct statements about, I guess, our society as a whole. I mean, it has a lot of statues. I think it has the most statues of any area, but again, don't quote me on that. First things first, I want to note, pay attention to the sightlines of statues. If sightlines didn't seem important yet, this is where they definitely are. So, you know, you first enter and you see this scene of two fencers, or two... I don't think that's the right sword they would use for fencers. So two swords people, sword wielders, and the victor who has their mask on is looking towards like a king or a ruler of sort. And then the loser who has a sword to their throat is looking at this like security man back there. The security man, he looks like he is trying to like stop those people from entering, because I mean there's this door here, and but he is also looking towards the downed fencer, and he has his hand on his sword like he's ready to wield it in case of an emergency, like he's about to withdraw it. Over here we have a musician, and I'll get to that audio log in just a second, playing the guitar. I guess he would be hooked up to this amp. I just think it's really funny that there's an amp statue. And he is looking at the queen, I guess you could say, who looks like she's looking at the guitarist, but her eye line is not quite in line with the guitarist. Instead, it looks like she's looking at this almost comically sized ring. And then there's the king, who is standing on a throne above everybody else. His hand is raised as like a, you know, like sort of indifference or like halting. It could just be like halt that, stop that, whatever, or it could be an okay. It's hard to say because, I mean, he's like really relaxed. It looks like he's looking upward. If we were to go up to the statue, it's really hard to say where he's actually looking. Maybe at the laser, maybe just out into nothingness, or he's trying to look down with his head raised up. Sort of just an indifference to it all.
I boasted among men that I had known you. They see your pictures in all works of mine. They come and ask me, who is he? I know not how to answer them. I say, indeed, I cannot tell. They blame me, and they go away in scorn. And you sit there, smiling. I put my tales of you into lasting songs. The secret gushes out from my heart. They come and ask me, tell me all your meanings. I know not how to answer them. I say, who knows what they mean? They smile and go away in utter scorn. And you sit there smiling. Rabindranath Tagore, 1910.
Okay, so this audio log is a little more separate from the rest of the keep. It's more about art in itself. Tagore is sort of talking to someone and saying that, they put this person or this thing into their work, their art, and when people ask, who is that person, or what do your songs mean, Tagore doesn't know how to answer them. Tagore just says, I don't know how to answer you. And I think this is pretty, well, it's about art and inspiration. Whether or not Tagore is talking to a literal person or like a metaphorical muse is unknown, and it's not important because it's something Tagore doesn't want to be clarified. If we were to ask endlessly, Tagore wouldn't answer. And clearly people are upset by this as they leave away in scorn when asking. I think this is it's about inspiration. You don't necessarily want to tell people what your art is trying to say. A lot of artists, they want people to find their own meaning in their work. And I think this is pretty heavily related with Braid. So when Braid came out, and for quite a while, a lot of thematic discussion about the game was limited to it's about the atomic bomb, which is it's a pretty obvious, well, not obvious, but it's a pretty well-known and apparent theme throughout the game. Like, there's the quote from, I want to say Oppenheimer, or one of the Manhattan Project scientists. And then there is also, the explosion at the end. And like that all, how do I put it? That all is kind of clear. But I remember when, people would discuss the game for quite a while after that, it would just kind of be limited to, oh, it's about the atomic bomb. When there's a lot of things going on in Braid, it also has sort of a commentary on, the typical damsel in distress video game plots and how they're implemented. It has comments about, like, entropy and things like that, or how memories and obsession and how we try not to remember unfortunate things. But like, yeah, it that sort of limitation. And then, people would ask, like, is this what your game is about? Or I'm sure you must have seen people asking other artists what their art is about, what it's supposed to mean. And I think Tagore is just saying, I don't want to tell. I don't know how to tell. But even though that makes people mad, the inspiration or the muse is happy, and Tagore seems to be okay with it. That even though people are scornful and walk away, they're fine with it. Okay, so mini rant about Braid aside, time for the actual puzzles. These are panels, but there is no start point on the panel itself, just the activator. Instead, we can notice pretty clearly that these are the same shape, that this panel matches the walkway, and if you were to just experiment a bit and, like, light up things, you would see, oh, that's not normal. You'd see that there's the start of the panel there, but, like, it kind of makes this odd shape, and activating it like that resets it. So then the natural sort of method of doing this then is to, well, walk on the pathway in a shape that solves the puzzle. I'm not sure if I quite got this right. Well, okay, I at least solved it. Let me look at something. If you've played the game, you might know what I'm doing. Oh, I didn't get it right. Okay, let me try that again really quick. Just once. I should be doing this, I think. Just a little extra little hoop there. And I think everything else I did was fine. This is just to save time later. Okay. So now we can see into the next area. We can see these two statues here. They're sort of well off. You know, this guy has a nice coat on. She has a nice dress on with a purse. This guy has like a little parasol. It looks like they're trying to get in. She's trying to get the attention of the queen or something. We can also see over here the next panel series, or the next panel with the next walkway. The floor is starting to drop down though. And there's all these wooden supports. I want to note that similarly to how the fences in the first hedge are kind of obviously put in later, so are the fences here. You have all these stone walls of the keep, but then like, you know, this metal gate with some nice sanded fencing, or it could be metal, I'm not sure. But then you have these wooden planks here that are blocking these. Pay attention to that. For now, oh right, there's another audio log I have to do.
Our hangnails are incredibly real to us, whereas to most of us, the English village of Netherwallop and the high Himalayan country of Bhutan, not to mention the slowly swirling spiral galaxy in Andromeda, are considerably less real. Even though our intellectual selves might wish to insist that since the latter are much bigger and longer lasting than our hangnails, they ought therefore to be far realer to us than our hangnails are. We can say this to ourselves till we're blue in the face, but few of us act as if we really believed it. A slight slippage of subterranean stone that obliterates 20,000 people in some far-off land. The ceaseless plundering of virgin jungles in the Amazon basin. A swarm of helpless stars being swallowed up, one after another, by a ravenous black hole. Even an ongoing collision between two huge galaxies, each of which contains 100 billion stars. Such colossal events are so abstract to someone like me that they can't even touch the sense of urgency and importance, and thus the reality of some measly little hangnail on my left hand's pinky. We are all egocentric, and what is realist to each of us in the end is ourself. The realest things of all are my knee, my nose, my anger, my hunger, my toothache, my sideache, my sadness, my joy, my love for math, my abstraction ceiling, and so forth. What all these things have in common, what binds them together, is the concept of my, which comes out of the concept of I, or me, and therefore, although it is less concrete than a nose or even a toothache, this I thing is what ultimately seems to each of us to constitute the most solid rock of undeniability of all. Could it possibly be an illusion? Or if not a total illusion, could it possibly be less real and less solid than we think it is? Could an eye be more like an elusive, receding, shimmering rainbow than like a tangible, heftable, transportable pot of gold? Douglas Hofstadter, 2007.
Okay, so Hofstadter's claim that we are egocentric people isn't necessarily an attack against character, but rather just a statement on perception. He starts by like using two extremes, or just a list of extremes. There is a hangnail that kind of hurts, and you know, the dying of galaxies, the Andromeda galaxy, you know, these mountains far away, the peaks of those mountains, the Amazon jungle, pretty much saying like, because the hangnail is something we feel and it's something that's immediate to us, it feels more real than those other things. Even though those are larger or more important in like the grand scheme of history, we don't interact with them. We don't see them normally. We don't think about them every day. They're not with us all the time, so they don't feel real, quote unquote. They don't have like a presence to us, and so we don't acknowledge it as much. This sort of personal perception is then extrapolated, I guess is the word, to then talk about ourselves. that because everything that we value the most, like our favorite things or our feelings, our physical feelings, because those are so real, because those are the most immediate, then the most real thing would be a self. And he kind of leaves with a question of like, is that self really it? Is the self really real, or is it some other like elusive condition or elusive subject? Is it something else entirely that's not necessarily real? So this is sort of like cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, that because everything that's close to us feels real or is realer in our perception, that the thing that is most close to us would be real and thus exist. But Skinner over there said that ourselves might not necessarily be a product of ourselves. Like, us as individuals and our beliefs and our actions could be the product of our environment. And so, is the self real if, like, is the concept of a self real if the environment plays such a huge role? Is the environment more real because that predicates the self? That, we think about our hunger because we as humans we need food to live. Or, like, we think about our boredom because our society likes fun, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it in a way that sounds more science-y or more rational, but like pretty much, is the self the end of that chain of thought? Okay. So this one I actually have some problems with sometimes. It looks so easy here. You can solve it. Be like, okay, I start on the top right, so it's like, well, I can't do that because then I block off there. So can I just go up and left? No, you can't go up and left. The pathway is specifically broken to prevent you from doing so. Which shows that there can be sort of a disconnect between the panel and the walkway, but it also means that it starts making you think of them as different entities. That the panel and the walkway aren't necessarily one-to-one. Let's see if I actually do remember how to do this. I believe it's like this, then this, and then you go here. And I just want to point this out. So you see that tar right there? When I light up the panel underneath, it has this like visual artifacting. I don't know if that is an actual glitch in the video game, or if that's like supposed to be something important in universe. Maybe it's supposed to be like a glitch in the Matrix tearing at the seams sort of thing. I'm really not sure. So we've cleared that. We can see the other end of one of these fences here. And here there's a statue that's carrying these really heavy bags. You can see them straining to actually go into here. And right there, right behind them, is another audio log already.
If a man, holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded of afterwards, keeps down and pushes away any doubts which arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books and the company of men that call into question or discuss it, and regards as impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it, the life of that man is one long sin against mankind. But, says one, I am a busy man. I have no time for the long course of study which would be necessary to make me in any degree a competent judge of certain questions, or even able to understand the nature of the arguments. Then he should have no time to believe.
So,
William K. Clifford, 1874.
Right, the credits. So, yeah, that's the Clifford audio log. I didn't know if I wanted to click on that yet, or did I want to wait? Because it's pretty relevant to the shipwreck, which I'm not going to be covering quite yet in this episode, so I wanted to go ahead and do it because there's something I forgot to mention about the statue of the king, which is that if we were to go back, so the audio log of Hofstadter was on the statue of the king, kind of hidden here. And I think part of that reason is because Hofstadter's quotes about, like, how we perceive things and how things closest to us feel real, it feels to me like it's sort of explaining how it's sort of saying that people tend away from empathy because the things that feel realist to us are those that affect us directly. I would hope not. I would like to believe that people are empathic by nature, but, you know, that's a whole other discussion for another day. But, so, hold on, I have to do some math. And by math, I mean I have to do some puzzle solving. Right. So, but what's also important to note about that and the Skinner audio log is that they both play into Clifford's audio log then. Because Clifford explains that, like, Clifford's sort of situation, I guess, I think I messed that up, is about a person who like, instead of researching facts or, you know, trying to learn facts or, you know, learn about something, instead keeps an ignorance or a doubt in their mind, and they intentionally keep that ignorance by avoiding any research, avoiding any discussion, or any sort of conflict that would otherwise sort of that would otherwise bring that into question. And, well, so the important thing about this, sorry, I'm still doing puzzle math. So the important thing about this is that, well, it's like, how do I put this? So yeah, so pretty much first he's acknowledging or agreeing with Skinner that a person's environment affects them at their core. Though in this case, Clifford is more referring to, like, things that a person clings to, like beliefs and knowledge, rather than just actions that might be subconscious. Clifford says that, like, that these are related to the environment somebody places themselves in and the actions they take. Then Clifford also says, like, you know, people might not be empathic and they might not want to put the work into learning these things because they're selfish in some way, or, you know, they're a busy person. They don't have time for that. So finally, Clifford says, like, this sort of holding on to ignorance is one long sin against mankind. The reason being that if somebody really didn't have time to, like, research things or take the effort to understand things, then they shouldn't have time to, as Clifford says it, to believe. Oh, that's right. Now I remember this. That if somebody didn't want to put in the effort, then they shouldn't hold on to their beliefs as if they were complete fact. Because, like, they don't have any sort of reason or foundation for those beliefs. And so they really don't have a reason to think they're as valid as facts. Like, if they haven't put in the time to research them or stuff like that, then they shouldn't be treated as equal or valid compared to like the actual truth per se. I'm sort of stumbling over my words here because I was trying to solve this puzzle and I messed it up. Great. But essentially what I'm getting at is that Clifford is saying that, like, because people tend to view things closest to them as most real, they might keep themselves in positions where they'll get misinformation because it affects them less than the effort required to learn the true things. But to actually act on that misinformation is the real sin. That, like, making decisions based off this falsehoods that are based out of a selfish desire to want things to be good for you only, or to be convenient for you, leads to harm for others. And, you know, as I'm already getting a little political in this episode, this is extremely relevant for today. There's a lot of misinformation that's always spread, and a lot of people are selfish in that they're not willing to research things or make changes in their life for the help of others or for the good of others. Case in point, masks. In America, at least, we have a problem where people just don't care about wearing masks. They're more, you know, these people will often say things like they can't breathe as easily when they are wearing a mask, or, you know, they don't have COVID, so they don't need to worry about spreading it. But, like, at the same time, that is a completely egocentric view that doesn't think about how those actions affect others. As Hofstadter says it, they only care about what's closest to them. Their breathing, their all that. Essentially, this is a very relevant quote, and it's building on this idea of people sort of putting themselves first and not others, and how environments can sort of allow that to happen. Okay, back to mechanics. This is a pretty straightforward puzzle itself. I mean, we know how these blocks work. This one needs to go... Wait a minute. We're not starting in the corner. And that's where the interesting part lies. That we're not starting in the corner. We can still draw these shapes out of order if we want. And that's actually important for here. We know that we need to go straight across, but we can't do it because that sort of large heaping of wood and metal is in the way. So instead we can skip over and fix it. I did that a little bit with the purple panel. Technically you're supposed to go back to that later. Again, I wanted to save time for it though. But yeah, so if the purple panel showed that the walkways and the panels are independent of each other, this one shows that you have to think that they're independent in order to solve puzzles. That is an important fact. Similarly, the positioning of this, in that you can see the panel from inside the puzzle, is of course relevant for another puzzle, which again I can't explain yet. Or at least I could, but it's not as important as the rest of this. Yay. Okay, so you'll notice that the floor dropped out significantly here. And what's below us is a whole scene of other statues. There's sort of a harvester of sorts with a big scythe cutting some grain or something. And then there is another harvester with like a hat on, carrying a bag, and their hand is out trying to, I guess, ask for something or arguing about something. And sitting on that desk is like a tax collector, an accountant of sorts. They have a lot of books, and they have a desk, and they have a bunch of bags behind them. And you may start to see a pattern here that, you know, first we had the king who was high up on a that the king was high up on like a throne, and then below that is the queen, who was slightly higher, and then like the workers, but like the fencers, the agent, the musician, And then behind them was like two kind of other well-to-be, well-off people. And then we had somebody carrying these really heavy bags. And now we have like this worker and a tax collector. And this is even deeper down. I'm going in terms of elevation. So what does that mean is here, well, a pretty grim scene. There's somebody yelling at somebody who is like up against the wall with their arms against the wall. You have people kind of in despair just laying against this pillar. And then over here there is like a robed person. They have all these bags in their like little pulpit. It's hard to say if they're meant to be like a religious person or a judge of some sort, maybe. Either way, it's very grim, and you can see that progression in height now, that the people here have like nothing. They're not even listening to the person who is higher up than them, who's kind of arguing. So I also want to show that there's no plants here. There's a bunch of like tiles and there's like these pillars, but there's no plants. The previous room, or the previous pit, had a few plants that were being harvested. The second room, or second pit, not really a pit, it has some grass kind of scattered about. And then the first one, though, has a lot of grass. So there's a serious decline in vegetation as we continue. The higher class has grass, the lower class has no grass. They have a sort of fake decadence in that these pillars are supposed to look regal or holy or something, but as we saw over there, the king doesn't have that. The king just has plenty of grass. Also, now you can see that the wooden fences here block entry from the corridors here between the fourth and third areas, and there between the third and second areas. Specifically, they block it from going into that first area with the king. Now for the actual puzzle. This one's pretty straightforward. It's just you have two panels here. It reflects. It's a reflection puzzle. That's, like I said, it's pretty simple. But so yeah, basically there's a clear hierarchy being shown of the statues related to their height, and that relates to their status. It's very clearly trying to like paint this as the upper class and this is the lower class. The working class back there is actually even. That the person who's like collecting the bags is on the same level as the person who's, you know, collecting the food or the harvest or whatever. But they're still kind of opposed in this case. And then yeah, over here there's the judge or the priest or whoever who's above the others and is trying to like preach to them or trying to talk to them, who has a bunch of bags of whatever hidden away, stashed away. They're meant to look sort of pious, I guess, or like look friendly maybe, but they have all that stashed away while the others just don't care. They're mad, they're depressed, they're in grief, they're in despair, which is pretty depressing. And then finally, as we go over here, this is where the hedge mazes and the back half meet up. There's a security guard who's trying to block us out of the first area. So again, also his hand is actually grabbing the sword hilt. So again, with this, you know, it's like the security guard's trying to keep people out of the upper class area. We are able to move through all of them. We have sort of transcended the system. What we've learned is that, we've learned that people are affected by their environment, and that we have to think about both the person who's controlling the environment and the person, and how we're affected by that environment. We learn that people can be naturally egocentric, in that people tend to think of things that are closest to them. Oh, also, that's literally what's happening with the queen, thinking of something that's closest to her, which you can see more clearly from this angle. And we learned that it's sort of a sin against humankind to be ignorant and not be empathic and not seek out better knowledge to make our decisions. So we've kind of learned to just go above this whole system of quadrants and classes and stuff. That seems like something this guy would want to keep out, right? But he's not looking at us. He's looking over there at the Dorito puzzle. Hooray for Slitherlink. So what this means is that it looks like he's trying to stop us. His hand is pointed towards us, so that even if we were to enter from like the hedges, we would be at his hand. But he's more concerned about the puzzle. So that puzzle is more of a threat to all of this system than we are, the person who just walked through it and opened all these doors. We're allowed to even open the door because this guy's too distracted by the Dorito puzzle. So Doritos are able to take down capitalism. No, so, yeah, so that's all, like, I think this is one of the most oblique areas with what it's trying to say in terms of, like, all that. It's one of the areas with the most statues in the game, and so it kind of relates directly to a society like that. But now we're up here. There's two separate halves, two separate panel puzzles. Like I said, you only have to solve one of these to get the laser. Also, now we're even higher than we were when we started. That going through all of that elevated us above the king, above all of that hierarchy, and above that platform. Likewise here, we're outside of our environment that's been carefully made for us. Instead, we can look down upon it. This is also sort of a real feature of hedge mazes, is a tower that overlooks it. At least, this is something that's in my local botanical garden, is there's an old hedge maze, and then there's a building with a tower that overlooks it. You think of also like the Overlook Lodge in The Shining. This is just sort of a natural architectural thing. So here's one solution. We have to remember how we solved each panel, even though we do have to rotate them ourselves, like here and here. Pretty straightforward. It's more or less a repeat of what we've already done. I also want to notice this environmental puzzle. It goes outside of the hedge mazes, again, breaking out of the environment that we've been placed in. I forgot to mention it, but the important thing about hedge mazes is they, even though they look natural because they're plants, hedges have to be specifically cut and mazes have to be specifically designed by somebody. So, like, you know, obviously the tree houses are designed by a game designer or a graphic designer or a 3D modeler. The hedge mazes too are that. But like the tree houses look natural. The trees look natural. These are very obviously put into place intentionally. And it's sort of highlighted because it's surrounded by these beige walls and also with a bunch of trees all over the place. So I mentioned the hierarchy from back here. This laser comes down to us. Every other laser in the game shoots upward. This one, it extends downward and shoots upward, sure. But yeah, the fact that it extends downward is important because if we go with the language of height equals hierarchy, this laser comes to our eye level, meaning that we are equal to this laser. That the reward we got from solving all this, which I guess could be equated to knowledge itself, or just information, or something, is equal to us. That's pretty cool in my opinion. That we are on the same level, literally. Also, more metal at the top of this tower. Metal from the shipwreck. Okay, so then we have this. I'm not good at this puzzle. Hopefully I remembered how to do it because it's very difficult. I might have already messed up. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I did. If I remember, I'm supposed to do this. I think I'm supposed to go here now. Nope, not quite. You can see how this one's always tricky for me. This? This might be another one where I look up the solution and then edit the video down. Oh, that's right. Now I remember. Okay. Yeah, okay, so what's interesting about this is that we are looking at two separate sort of examples here. Two separate halves of the keep. Hold on. So, the hedges, we had to pay more attention to our environment. We had to get more sort of influenced by things outside of our control. Also, in the hedge mazes, I just want to point out there's sort of a seasonal progression. It's like spring, summer, fall, winter. I'm pretty sure that's how it is. It's like the more bright blooming, then it's yellow because it's sort of hot and dried a little. Then fall is where it starts to brown and go dark, and then winter is where it's dead. Anyways, also, the little dirt path environmental puzzle is pointing us towards the logging facility and also towards Face Tree, which is interesting. But it also is just sort of a pathway out that doesn't actually leave the keep. It wants to, though. It wants to go towards the trees and not go out towards the like, people. But yeah, so in this half, we had to pay more attention to our environment and get controlled by it. But what we ended up with is pretty much the repeat of the puzzles we did. It wasn't exactly a new puzzle. The other one was... also, in here, the puzzles are separate. It's pretty much the lines going through the middle here separate them into essentially the panels we already did. So, in that case, or in that regard, we're kind of keeping them separated. Gotta keep them separated. Over here, this has no boundaries between them, even though there's very distinct boundaries between the 4 quadrants. And what's interesting about that is that this is a more unique puzzle than the other ones. So, at some point, I don't know exactly when, Jonathan Blow made a statement kind of against filler puzzles in puzzle games, that every puzzle in a puzzle game needs to have a purpose. And this has sort of been controversial with The Witness, as you might think. And I want to note that this is more of a filler puzzle, because this is literally repeating the solutions we already know. But it doesn't, like, its purpose is being a repeat. That while this repeats the solutions to the hedge mazes, it's contrasted to this. That by breaking the boundaries between the puzzles here, and, like, you know, cutting out these sort of fences that were added in later, we get a more interesting and compelling puzzle. Sort of saying that it's a good thing to break down those walls. From here, everything kind of looks even, I guess. We can also see these. So, yeah, this is the whole reason I took longer on these panels. So, I'm not going to get the one for there, but for reference, it goes. For this one, the two panels or the two start points kind of cross by each other so that it makes a shape that's like. I'm trying to think. I want to say it's like that. Basically, it combines the two L shapes so that they're in one group instead of two separate groups. But so, all of these have sort of different tricky ways that they are implemented. That one's the most basic one. You just have to look at the walls in a different perspective. Then that one, we actually have to cross back over. So even though we go... it forces us to cross between the classes this way. Also, just another kind of funny note, if there's like the working class and the like impoverished class, and then there's the upper class, there's not really anybody in the fourth class, which would be the middle class, or the remaining one, I should say. There's people leaving to go up to the upper class, and there's somebody trying to enter, but the door was closed to both of these before we solved this puzzle, So it's sort of, if anyone's familiar, there's not a lower upper middle class, it's workers class and the bourgeoisie. But yeah, so kind of crossing through those is more compelling to us. Also, while this blue puzzle is like, it just incorporates another mechanic from elsewhere, the reflection, I think it's also interesting because in a way, the reflection puzzle is sort of like imagining another person. That whereas we've had to walk by ourselves along these pathways and maybe imagine what it's like to be up here, this is the only one where, like, since the language of this puzzle is we are walking through a puzzle, then the reflection is another person walking in the opposite direction. And in that regard, running into the other reflection pathway is like running into that person. So we have to be mindful of other people that way, which means we need to have empathy, and we need to put ourselves into positions where we have to consider other viewpoints. Okay, cool. Just going over a few more things really quick on my notes, making sure I got everything. Right. There's one thing I wanted to talk about before the end of the episode, other than the fact that this is metal. Let me just go all the way down here. Sorry if this is kind of sickening, motion sickness wise. So I completely left this hanging, but we have these dead people in front. Okay, so there's a few bits of visual language we've covered that is used here. I mean, I mentioned that elevation is class, but also so is plant life and foliage. So the area with the highest foliage, these like archways here, there's no statues. Nobody is over here. And the entrance to here is closed with portcullises, and there's been tar dumped into it. So not only is nobody accessing this garden from like the upper class area, but nobody's accessing it from anywhere else. And if we think about this, so like at least all of those were in one sort of society. Over here is completely outside of that. It's so far away from that society. And that's where we find, the dead person in the bucket of tar. That's where we find this, where this overlook blocks the mountain. That's where we find the vat of tar here, and that's where we find this piece of metal showing a lady looking out the window. But there is one other thing. Where's the flowers here? I've mentioned that every area has flowers, right? Well, if we go back over through here, there aren't really any flowers in the upper class area. And as the plant life only dies if we go further back, I guess there's these right here all by themselves. That's the only one in the face of death. Maybe that's what the king is looking at, is these nice flowers. But beyond all that, all the other flowers are in the front area here. But going back to the start of the episode, there's even more flowers in the flower fields just outside the keep, where nobody could leave the keep because they're all kind of in their own areas, and nobody can enter the keep because they don't want people entering the keep, because they have all those security systems and deadly security systems set up. So, you know, the fun little environmental puzzle here, the other environmental puzzle there, just the really vibrant flowers are out. The vibrant trees are out. We only get these trees. The monastery, that's out. Everything else on the island is kept out. There's even a drawbridge. I mentioned the drawbridge, that there's only really 2 spots you can actually view it from. One of them is up at the laser, the other one is this platform here, both of which are higher than the king. It's hard to tell if the king can even see the drawbridge from his angle, or from his position. The drawbridge is meant to keep out, people. And we can't see the tree houses either from anywhere other than here. So, this is starting to go into a bit of a game theory angle, but, so I think it's relevant. So, this is sort of something I've been going back and forth on, is how much of a in-universe story is there to the witness? After all, I mean, there's a lot of themes and, and critique and ideas being presented. And there is sort of a backstory with the people who designed the game in-universe. But what about these people? Because we've seen signs of civilization. It could be that the statues were there to look like people, so that, as you're playing the game, you have a reference of, a person that you can identify with and relate to. We understand more about this audio log because we have a person directly in front of it. Or, we understand this audio log better because of its position with, the royalty. But, also I do want to say that, the king is higher than the queen, but this is condemned. The idea of this status is condemned in the area. So, I really doubt this is trying to show anything about inequality beyond inequality being, evil in some way, or a sin against mankind. That's at least what it seems like to me. Maybe not evil necessarily, but bad. It's bad. Anyways. So, right, so, sure, maybe the statues, I mean, we also have that quarry over there that literally made the statues. We haven't been there yet, but I need to mention it just so that, there's context. But we've just learned from Hofstadter that people have a tendency to focus on themselves and things that immediately relate to them. And we've learned that that's not necessarily a good thing. We should be empathic and envision other viewpoints. So, what if these were people? We see them as statues, and the quarry makes us think oh, they are just statues. But they could be real people. They could be people trying to go in there. They could be people toiling away at field labor, hard labor, to try and make ends meet. Could be people being in despair over there with not much hope in sight. Which is, it's depressing, but maybe that's what the Keep is trying to say. There's so many people here because it wants us to just once picture those people as real people. Octopus. So, then we have the shipwreck. I won't be going there quite yet today. But I want to note a few things. For one, pretty much every piece of furniture with the sun logo faces the sun. If you think about I say pretty much because not everything, but there's like the pillow on top of the roof of the intro area. There's those beach chairs by the beach, and so forth. And then there's like the orchard area. Maybe not faces the sun, but it wants you to consider the sun. This doesn't face the sun. The sun's also like hidden from a cloud by here. Instead, we're looking out. This is kind of a cheeky joke because there's an environmental puzzle that requires you to take the boat through here, but not while you're riding the boat. You have to set the boat through the shipwreck, send it to here, and then ride it over to here. So the couch is kind of a funny joke, like, hey, might as well get comfy. You gotta wait for that boat to cross. But it's also just looking over, like, a collapsed part of the ship that kind of looks like a cross. I don't know if that's a symbolism or not. Or just other parts of the shipwreck. There's this whole jagged area there that looks like claws. And then one of these trees again, which on the lake was significant. Actually, there's a few of these. I guess these could just be shady trees, because they do look like the ones in the shady tree area. But this is far enough that it feels like this is still sort of guiding you somewhere. I mean, all those go along the coastline to here, then to here that guides you to the shipwreck. And I'm not going to talk about sort of the art or like the philosophical implications of it and the meanings and whatever. I just want to put an idea in here. So, if we treat the statues as people, we have an interesting drought of statues. Think of the areas with statues. There is the quarry, which, again, we haven't been to. There's the town, technically the peninsula. Then there is technically the swamp. And then there is the peak, the mountain top. And then the keep. So there's sort of a line going from keep to town to mountaintop, where most of the statues are. There's not really any in the desert or in like the intro, orchard, symmetry. I guess there's the siren in the symmetry. So we have that line. And yeah, there is the quarry as well, right there. But what's interesting is, if you look at it that progression, there's the boat, the shipwreck per se, and then there's a huge concentration of people. And then a little further out, there's less concentration. Then the mountain has another concentration. So it could be said that the people in the keep came from the shipwreck. I mean, after all, they shipwrecked literally on this shore, on the shoreline. They walk up, and there's a keep. This could also explain the difference in materials, that the keep has these like metal walkways added. It has those fences. It has all these modern things, or like the wooden walkways that make it so you walk over the people of lower class. It has all these modern things that were added later, and there's evidence of like the metal from the ship being used in some of these. So it could be said that then people came here from that. Now, other people had to come here from something else. That's where the tree houses come in. I mentioned that the tree house looked like a boat from the swamp, and that, you approach it by boat. So there must have been some other group of people that came to the tree houses and then went on to land. That's why there's a drawbridge in front of the tree houses. The people in the keep don't want the people from the tree houses to enter. Now, sure, that could be a reach, but hear me out. Why would the keep need protection if there's nobody else on the island? If everybody on the island is in the keep, then they wouldn't need guards and tar and stuff like that. There is other people on the island. If we think about the architectural era, what's behind the quarry, I'm going the wrong way, is the desert. And in the desert, we had like these early technologies showing like the sun, but also the usage of boats, you know, that whole reflective panel. And we had other signs of life as well. Outside of the statues, you know, there was somebody eating in the orchard, but I guess that's a whole other deal. But we have tree houses, you know, those are places people live in. And then yeah, there's the monastery, there's the town, there's the intro area. But so people are being kept out of the keep, presumably because the keep is supposed to be this nice orderly area where people are quote unquote in their place. It's not, we shouldn't be like that, because we keep going above it and we see the rest of the island only when we're above the keep, and we unlock the doors that allow us to leave. We visually leave with like this pathway. A whole lot of ways that we are the only ones that have left and entered the keep. So that, combined with the themes of the keep, sort of paints this one picture that the people in the keep got here by shipwreck. They were not the first people here, but they sort of kept their ground with like weapons and whatnot. It's very colonialist, I would say. That, I mean, it looks like most of this castle was just repurposed anyways, with like the extra stuff added. There's some statue people that are in the town and in the mountain. Whether or not those were the people that started on this island or not is hard to say. But yeah, there's like a divide here. And I think that's the big thing. That the keep is one area of the game out of, I think, 12 lasers. You can't just do the keep. That in order for us to actually grow and learn, we have to go further beyond our limits, beyond the walls of this keep, this stronghold. And we already did that. In the intro area, we were literally, like, our task was to exit the intro area. We were in a comfortable area, walled in, very similar to this, but we left. And here, we're able to sort of do that around others to show others the way to do so. Whether or not that helps is uncertain, but it's just cementing this idea that we should be going out and learning and improving ourselves, because being secluded and staying in one place, or putting others down so they can only stay in one place, or just keeping the rest of the world away from people, is one long sin against mankind.